So I'm Bela Koe-Krompecher, and I wrote this book called Love, Death, and Photosynthesis. There it is. And I live in Columbus. I was mostly raised in Ohio. So the book is about two friends of mine who are both musicians who both died somewhat tragic deaths, but were very funny and very influential in my life, and then myself. So it just sort of traces our life in a very long, non-linear fashion. And it took a while to write it. And at this time, I'm not a professional writer, so to speak. I'm a social worker, but prior to becoming a social worker, I worked at a record store for many years. So I sort of lived several different lives.
Love it. And I'm Hilary Saunders. I'm the managing editor of No Depression. It's a quarterly music publication all about roots music. And we have a daily updated website, and it's great. So I'm actually I'm not gonna go off script, but I had like a list of questions, and they had like an order and like to them. But since you mentioned, I think one of the things that struck me while reading the book was that my musical experiences and knowledge and stuff always felt like 2 to 3 degrees of separation away from the musicians that you were referencing, that you grew up with, that whose music influenced you. But like you just said, there's something about this art form that brings people together, that is so uniting, that you're like, I'm not a writer, but I have these stories. And like, how did you, when you were putting all of this together, how did you sort of balance maintaining the specificity of your own memories and these stories and these places with the universality of these musical themes?
So that's actually an excellent question, because that's something I thought about.
Yeah.
When I was assembling the book, which was actually whittled down from about 800 or 900 pages down to this 250 page book. I did not intentionally want to write a book that focused just on music and bands and sort of name droppy. Does that make sense? But what's so wonderful about the independent music scene and the DIY culture is that everything is so readily accessible and intertwined without being I don't know how to describe it. There's no, I just felt like in the world that I've always inhabited since an adult, there's like no hierarchy, if that makes any sense. So it was just music for me, and I can't, and I would imagine for the many people in the book and many people who buy the book, is such an integral part of our existence that it's like listening. It's almost like it's like listening to food, right? It's like it's essential to our well-being. And I didn't want to write anything that was glorifying anything either. I just wanted to make it real as I experienced it, which there wasn't. I mean, there might be funny stories in there, but there wasn't any sort of like, and then Mick and I hung out, there's nothing like, what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
So I don't know if that answers that or not.
I think I just let someone else in. Hello.
Okay. Yeah.
I just took initiative. I just did it. So
did it.
Welcome. Nice. Okay. Okay. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. What was sort of the impetus for telling this story? Like, at what point did you sort of realize, like, oh, like this blog I'd been writing, like maybe that should like turn into like ink on paper.
So when I started, so the book came out of a blog that I had been writing for years. A weird thing that had happened with the blog around 2011. It got a lot of reads in that this sort of indie rock, Americana, whatever punk world. I mean, it's got like 130,000 reads in countries. People read it in countries I've never heard of. But at the time I was writing it, when I started it, I was getting my master's degree, and I'm working full time, and I had 2 kids. So there wasn't any purpose to write it just for me to write it. And then it's certainly less dangerous just to throw it up on a blog. Like there's no commitment there, if that makes sense. 2011, I was approached by a screenwriter, which was weird, who wrote for Desperate Housewives. Is that? Yeah, that's a show, right?
What?
Desperate. Yeah. So this guy emailed me and said, blah, blah, blah. I can't even remember his name. He's like, I'm a screenwriter. I'm a writer for Desperate Housewives. I've written a couple movies. I really like your blog. I think it would be a great movie. And so we just kind of went back and forth. And literally I was like, great, write a screenplay. Like I'm just doing my thing here. And then his response was, I've been thinking about this. Really, you should just write a book, and then the movie would come after that. I was like, okay, I'm never going to do that. Because it just seemed like maybe there's a sort of the sort of, there's something very chicken shit by DIY too. Like, so I think there's something brave, but chicken shit at the same time, if that makes sense. So, I just didn't even think about it, because it just seemed like a commitment, right? And if there's a theme throughout the book. Like, I think if you grow up somewhat broken, commitments are really difficult. So 2015, 2016, I met Joe Steinhardt from Don Giovanni Records, and at Flyover Fest, which is a festival put on by $2 Radio Books here in Columbus. And Joe came over and just said, hey, I love your blog. I think it should be a book. Would you like to do a book if you're ever interested in doing a book? And we just kept in touch. I mean, I was a fan of the label, of course. And then when one of the second main character in the book, when Jenny May died, Joe reached out and just said, now's the time for the book. So that's how it came. So it was I don't know if it could be any more organic than that.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there was no, yeah. So I think that plays a role in how it reads like it does.
Okay, I have questions about that. But going back even further, I mean, why even sort of like extricate these memories and stories from your brain and put them on the internet? Like, what was sort of, inside of you that you're like, I think I need to like preserve this, or like banish it, like excise it like a demon? Like
I wrote a lot in the 90s, but I didn't share it.
Sure.
I wrote some things. I wrote for a couple of fanzines. I wrote for Raygun. I wrote for this zine called Shredding Paper out of San Francisco. I wrote. I was writing a book at that time, but I was actually drinking quite a bit. And while I think I was talented, and I've only taken one writing class in my life. So when I started writing this, there was no purpose. I just started writing about these 2 people I knew. Jenny was still alive. She had been struggling with homelessness for a long time. I threw it up on the internet. I asked my friend Ted, hey, I wrote this thing. He's like, make a blog. And I was like, what's that? I didn't even know what it was. And then people read it and they liked it. And I actually thought, this isn't bad. Like, and I enjoyed it because it was very cathartic for me. And the more I sort of got into it, and at the time, Jenny was alive. You know, she was alive for much of the writing, and I was experiencing her life not just as a friend and somebody who loved her, but also as a social worker, who really witnessed the struggles she had from a professional, not just as a friend. And then what I also realized was so much of my own like experiences in childhood and things like that continued to play a role and continue to play a role as you know, a middle-aged man. So
did she know you were writing about her, about these stories?
She loved it. Yeah. She loved it. There was it was sort of a thing, and like I said before we started, Columbus is a really big small town.
Yeah.
So when the blog sort of took off, the local arts paper did a big like front page story on the blog and on her, and she really liked it. But she also really appreciated someone being able to detail her struggles in a way that was respectful. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
And I hope that's what comes out of it. So
yeah, I mean, as again, someone in music and in media and in words, but also completely detached from the real life people and sort of subsequent characters in this book. It's such a humanizing text. And you're so funny, like throughout the book, like in your memories, there is a sense of humor, but also I think your sense of humor also comes out. But yeah, I think you definitely achieved that of not shying away from, shall we say, the more raw experiences of human existence, while also creating something that's heartening. One of the things that took me a while to like get used to while I was reading it is that the book is not in any sort of chronological order. So since we're on Zoom, I can sort of like show you, anyone tuning in, watching on YouTube, whatever, that like, this is sort of a large format book, and like each chapter is sort of broken up. Not even chapter, like vignette is broken up by year. And like, we just went from 1992 to like 2004. And I started reading and I was like, what the hell is going on here? But it works so well. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about like why with this sort of narrative structure, but also how, like, did you just write down your memories over the years and then like shuffle them like cards and then just like lay them out in an order? Or did you literally start writing with like, you know, this first actually hysterical memory of driving up to the McDonald's, and then just like, as each new sort of like memory or vignette or like narrative came through, you're like, and we're just going to slap it together. Like, what was that process like for you?
So it's funny because the first thing I wrote on the blog, which is probably still there, was not that funny story. It's a different funny story.
Okay.
And I really appreciate that you get the humor of it. So, and I just like want to make a comment on that, is because some people say it's a really sad book, it's a tragedy and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
and
I mean, it fucking is.
Like,
I hope I can say that.
Like all lives are a tragedy because we all die at the end. Like even like Christ's last words were, my God, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Like that's the last thing he said. Like, right? Like the last thing Christ ever said was the most human thing he ever said. Right. Right. And I mean, that's life. Like, it's funny and sad. So I'm really glad that you get the humor, because I want people to laugh, because life is funny. It's absurd.
It's absurd. It is definitely absurd.
It is so absurd. So the story is, it's obviously it's intentionally non-linear in time, partly because when memories come to me, they don't come in, there's no linear fashion to them. I hear a song, I smell something, I taste something, a memory comes back, or I have a memory and then maybe I'll listen to a song to enhance that memory. And then when I'm writing, of course, more come out. So I think the intentionality of it jumping around is to fully grasp people, how they really are and how we feel them in our lives, whether they're living or dead, or they're not a part of our life in that moment. And I can say for the most part, the people, my memories of people that I've loved over the years, that I've cared for, are almost 90% joyous and happy occasions. You have to really work at the sadness to make that sadness come alive, I think, on the page. I think songwriters do that extremely well. I think it's hard to do for writers unless you're overtly sensitive, which some of us are. Like, but my brother's up here right now. Like, we didn't have the best childhood, but all our memories that we talk about are joyous memories. So I think with the book, I really wanted to capture that, and capture how music was such a support in our lives and continues.
Okay, so since you mentioned it, I literally have a question that I had prepared about music and memories, and I love that you mentioned smell as something that can trigger a memory, because I've read that that's actually the most that our senses are that's one of the most heightened senses that is connected to memory. Not a scientist. Anyway, so are there songs that from the time in your life that is published in this book that you can't listen to anymore? Are there songs that every time you hear them, you're transported to a different place? Do certain songs have a new meaning? Have you been able to reframe them, understand them in new context? Are there smells that transport you to a different song and a different time? I was very curious about all of those sort of tidbits of music and memory.
Yes, to all of that. So there is a playlist on Spotify from
good. Okay.
So you can just search Love, Death, and Photosynthesis and the playlist will come up.
Perfect.
So absolutely, there are songs that I hear that are so deep within me that they will always there's that old folk song, Go Tell Aunt Rhody. And this is weird. Okay, so I was thinking about that song, and I had it on the very first record I ever owned was a 10-inch Folkways record by Charity Bailey, who was just a school teacher in New York City. And she did this, she made this 10-inch children's record, and Go Tell Aunt Rhody was on it. And I remember in kindergarten taking that song, that record to school and having the teacher play it. I was talking about that song to my daughter because when my ex-wife was pregnant, I would sing that song to, my wife's stomach.
Yeah.
And when Saskia was born, she was crying and they put her in the little incubator and I started singing it and she stopped. She stopped crying. And So I was telling her this story because she went on that trip with me to the East Coast where we met you.
Yeah.
And so I did a reading at Feeding Tube Records. So so this is the weird coincidence. I know I'm going off a little bit. So
love it. Keep going.
So we go, so we do a reading at Feeding Tube Records in Northampton. And Byron Coley sitting there is this Charity Bailey record that I've only seen one copy of that I own in my entire life. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have this Charity Bailey record. I was just talking about it. Go tell Aunt Rhody. And he's like, take it. Like, nobody cares about it. So one, life is coincidental. But yes, there are songs that obviously take me back. You know, Touch Me, I'm Sick. You know, to go from that to one is like, I remember the first time I heard it, which I write about in the book. That was a very momentous time for me to hear that song at that particular moment on that day. There are concerts I have seen where they're just etched, like it's almost a religious experience of having those. There was a period where when I quit drinking for a couple of years, I couldn't listen to country music. It was too difficult. Like I couldn't listen to George Jones or Merle Haggard or Townes Van Zandt. I couldn't even listen to Tim Hardin or Phil Oakes, because those were things that was music I listened to when I was extremely dark. After my divorce, I was in a really, really dark period, which I allude to in the book towards the end. And that national record came out where there's a song on there where they cover a Thinking Fellers Union song. They cover Noble Experiment. And I remember I was in my bedroom, it was here in this apartment, and I was like in a very desolate state. I was actually like standing, like crying. And that song came on, and that Noble Experiment song is like, that's the song I want played at my memorial. And in the middle of this weird national song, they start singing it, which oddly totally reflected what I was feeling in that moment. It was exactly what I needed to hear at that time to not necessarily pull me out what I was feeling, but to be reflective of it, to have that. Yeah. It was almost like lending an ear to it. I think music does that, right?
Yeah.
Like we're the listener to the music, but really the music is the listener to our emotions.
Yeah. What's the line in Almost Famous that Penny Lane's like, you know, when you get sad, you just go to the record store and you visit your friends. Like, it's just.
Yeah.
But yeah, my records are my friends. We're going to make that sound like a badass thing and not a depressing thing. But even, you know, like the title of the book is named, you know, after a song. You have, well, you can, the sort of like inscriptions at the beginning are lyrics, you know, what goes through your brain and your heart when you hear those songs, your friends singing these songs?
Something that the underground scene and the punk scene brought to me really at an early age. I'm thinking like 15 years old, hearing REM and Lou Reed and Ramones, and was the elimination as the destruction of hierarchy in music and art was so powerful for me. Growing up in the 80s, I mean, this was like 83, 84, where music was very sterilized, and I hate to use the term corporate, but it was, right? Yeah, really. So hearing music that had very little inhibitions to it and very adult was important for me, that life didn't have to be a weird fantasy or some kind of bullshit. But and I've talked about this before in interviews and podcasts, but I'm going to put my little social worky hat on. So people that may have some emotional scars, we actually in substance abuse issues. We actually hear music differently. Our brains interpret music differently. We feel it at a cellular level.
Whoa.
So we experience it differently. It doesn't mean we're more important, and I'm sure other people do that for other senses or other art. And so that's why we can sit in a room, right? Or like Mozart's Requiem is such a beautiful piece of music for me. And you could sit in a room with somebody and they're just like, I appreciate it, but they really don't, right? So I think for some of us, that's why it's so important to us. And from a very early age, I remember being at Kroger with my dad in 4th grade, and National Record Mart was next door. And I was thinking, basically saying, Dad, we could just eat cereal this week and you can buy me those 2 Kiss records. So,
wait, so did you get cereal, or did you get records, or did you get?
No, I didn't get. I had to wait to get the records. And so the other thing too is that substance users have the same thing. Like people that have experienced heavy trauma in their lives are more drawn to opioids, because part of the sensation they feel from the opioids is, and they'll say, I feel like I'm being hugged. I feel like I'm being loved. And because they come from a background of trauma and feeling unnurtured and unaccepted. And so that drug gives them that. And for some of us, that's what music does.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of weird, but the science is behind it, by the way.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of reading in grad school, in music and stuff. And let me tell you, they don't talk about it on a cellular level.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, talk about your career change. I mean, the book goes through, and, thus far this evening, we've talked about, your upbringing and, finding your way into music at a very young age. And then, working in a record store, starting a label, being in, you were talking about the Sebadoh and Gaunt poster and art behind you, making prints, making tickets, doing the things. And then boom, you can just immediately talk about and here's the social work element, here's the science of things, and absolutely pivot that way. But what was sort of what happened that caused you to go to grad school?
So 2001, Jerry Wick died. So he's one of the main characters. The book is actually named after one of his songs. And he died tragically on his bike. He was drunk. He was hit by a drunk driver. I quit drinking early 2002. I got married 2001. 9/11 actually happened. The record store where I worked at burned down. All happened. My drinking was weird because I could go days without drinking, but once I started drinking, I couldn't stop. I just could not stop. So if I stopped in a bar, I was going to be in that bar for 5 hours. I was not going to leave. But that was the only way I knew how to connect with other people. So you could only be alone for so long, right? So my drinking was really difficult, and my depression was really difficult, and I had gotten married, and it was we got married and it was already falling apart within months. So I got sober. My ex-wife she moved from Columbus to Gainesville, Florida. I followed her there several months afterwards, after a very trying fall, winter, and got sober. I was in early 30s, 33. So, which seems to be a marking age for people to make changes in their life, I guess, or dying.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. So, um, so from there, I didn't have a college degree. I dropped out of college when I was 18 to work in a record store. So there I was, early 30s without an education. And I really liked, I was very active in 12-step communities. That really helped me a lot. And I realized I wanted to help people. And I wanted to learn how to help people. I didn't just want to do it. So I found out I loved college. So I went back, I got like 3 degrees and worked and started working with the homeless and really, really, really enjoyed doing it. So, from there, it kind of like worked. I mean, and to be honest, there's not that much different with working with the homeless and working with indie rock musicians and people that go to independent record stores. There's a pretty.
I laugh, but please explain that comparison.
Just a lot of substance abuse and mental health issues.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
And yeah, so so it's a joke, but not a joke, right?
I got that, but I didn't want to make any inferences.
And like I love record stores, but I think that's a world, especially at that time. I mean, I don't think that sort of record store world exists anymore the way it used to. So I think it was a great job for when I had it, but I hate to use the term grow up, but I had to do something different.
Yeah. Like you said, 33.
Yeah.
You have to
33, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was just writing a story and well, it's fine. I was interviewing George Harrison's wife, like his widow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That's so cool.
In honor of the 50th anniversary of
that I saw. I'm completely jealous.
The gnomes are in front of Paul here. But anyway, she was referencing that documentary that was made a few years ago about Tower Records. And so I sort of like delved like into that world for a minute while working on this story of just like how huge like Tower Records in LA, I mean, LA bookstore, like meant to, the music community, the whole community. And yeah, it's a different world now. I mean, we're even like thinking about like possibly commissioning a story about like, why are cassette tapes coming back? Like, it's just like we said earlier, like, it's just, life is absurd. So hang on, I had a follow-up question based on something you said, and then I might have lost it. Career change,
work, homeless people.
Work. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just pivot. We can edit this one out. So one thing that I think is interesting, we've talked sort of about your friends, about the tragedy, about presenting these people as characters, but I think Ohio itself is also a very important character in this book. And well, I'm in New York right now, so we're coming in here to this Zoom room from all across the country. Can you like explain Ohio to the rest of like the LA people in the Zoom room right now?
I can. Actually, what I can do is I can do a little reading, because I have a little chapter about Ohio, if that works. I was in Chicago last week, and a chunk of the people were from Ohio. And so when I read it, when I got done, somebody was like, "Oh my God, that is so Ohio." And I was like, "Yeah, because it's actually called Ohio."
Yes.
So that
was what I was going to say.
Yeah.
that your work connecting with people. It was not a question. It was an anecdote. It was a memory, as we already established. They're fleeting. Which was that when I saw your reading and the event in New York, there was a person in front of me whose cell phone rang in the middle of your reading. And, you know, being the curmudgeon that I am, I was like, "Ugh, turn your freaking phone off, rah, rah, rah." But I was close enough to this person to be able to see like the caller ID. And the person's caller ID basically said like AA and then another person's name, which I share as just a very small anecdote to sort of, you know, like hope that you know that it seems like your book, these stories, this music is reaching the right people.
Oh, that's good. That's so sweet. Oh.
Reaching people who get it. So
might need it, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I hope so. Okay, so
now we can go back to Ohio.
I'll read this little thing about Ohio.
Okay.
And then maybe this will be the only thing I read. So Ohio lies flat in places, blanketed with fields of soybeans, corn, and wheat, with the skyline the size of the Pacific Ocean. There are a few larger towns in western Ohio, most notably Dayton and Toledo. The rest of this wide, smooth surface is modded with small towns, places that are glorified as the small town heartland America, with large brick courthouses in the center of town, several ice cream shops, and a hardware store that has every widget known to man, complete with the kindly old gent who knows every kid's name. There, amongst the one traffic light towns, lies a sense of nostalgia for something that has never existed, at least not for them. The belief in the American dream, long crushed by the greed of capitalism, still stands strong on Memorial Day and on the 4th of July. But any weekend drive through these towns reveals a deflated dream of middle America, from the empty storefronts to the lack of children playing softball, kick the can, or doing anything at all outdoors. Then there is another small town, Ohio, with images of Sherwood Anderson, unlocked doors, county fairs filled with cotton candy and first kisses. An idealistic concept that feeds into the idea that a small town anybody can rise from the cornfields and hidden glens to climb into space, like Neil Armstrong or John Glenn. The presidency, 7 of them, all Medicore, hail from Ohio. Or the silver screen, like Paul Newman or Clark Gable. In spite of all this, when one grows up in Ohio, one has the feeling of being the underdog, of someone who always comes up just short. Ohio is seen as an also-ran, an almost did. Instead of an ocean, we have a lake. Instead of mountains, foothills. We are defined by our collective losses. Our sports teams are known for despair. Cleveland losing the World Series with 1 out to go. Cincinnati tethered to a football team named the Bengals, but better known as the Bungles. Ohio State went 30 years between national championships. Every down the Buckeyes play is the soundtrack of a collective gasp from the entire state. We are in our hearts cynical but lovable malcontents. Musically, Ohio is rich, especially when it comes to punk rock, with an abrasive, arty sound propelled by the ample liberal arts colleges dotting the state. The art scenes have brought forth the terrific and idiosyncratic Pere Ubu, Devo, and the Dead Boys. Cleveland had Prison Shake, The Mice, Death of Samantha, and My Dad is Dead. Dayton had Guided by Voices, The Breeders, Brainiac, and a legion of funk bands. Cincinnati had the Wolverton Brothers, whose shambling country art punk is as twisted as anything from a David Lynch movie. The Ass Ponies and the Afghan Wigs. Appalachian Death Ride and Geraldine were 2 sinister bands that would at least be marginally famous if they resided anywhere but Athens, Ohio. In Columbus, we first had Jim Shepard, Scrawl, the Great Plains, the Gibson Brothers, RC Mob, and Mike Rep, all made up of various oddballs and characters who would play a huge role in the development of
Sorry, Bela, you're muted. It was my mistake. I was letting somebody in.
Sorry. I might have done it too.
Sorry about that.
The specialness of that time was mostly due to the large and fanatical friendships and respect we had not only for one another, but also for the bands who set the stage. Jerry Wick and Jenny May would both be besides themselves to share the stage with any Ron House fronted band. And the same can be said for the New Bomb Turks, who would open for any band they respected. We put stock in our friends who would carry the torch of loneliness offset by a burning desire to be heard and to hopefully lay next to another congenial soul by 5 a.m. Our hopes crashed when things didn't quite pan out as we had planned. We were prepared for it, as it is in an Ohioan soul to step up to the plate and be called out by the proverbial sinker ball. 3 strikes, the trip, the fumble, the drive, etc., and so forth. Nobody got famous. Nobody ever really made a dent in any product counting mechanism like Billboard magazine or the clanging of cash registers. But we cherished one another as if our lives depended on it. Night in and night out, we discovered that success wasn't the prize. The prize was the friendship and the making of art for fuck's sake. That is what an Ohioan does. Not always stylish, but always sincere. Winters in Ohio are choked with the ash and polluted air of decrepit steel mills and coal mines, and the landscape populated with battered hopes and forlorn thoughts. These somehow congeal together to make a gray morass that slowly settles like a pelt over the entire state. It comes creeping in November, makes itself comfortable in December, and by January has dug its claws into the ground, into the psyches of every inhabitant. It was fitting that Jerry died in January. So I don't know if that it describes Ohio. Maybe
well, you already said that the locals already said, like, this is it. I laughed though, and like I got certain things, and I've only been to the 3 major cities. And as a Miami alumna, and sorry, I have to clarify because Ohio, University of Miami in Coral Gables. We don't like Ohio State. So, 30 years between titles, like we ain't mad about that. Like I'll laugh. What are you listening to these days? What music like gets you stoked these days?
That is so what did I just buy? So like I'm listening to the new Lindsey Buckingham record, which I love. Like, and every time I listened, like I've been listening to Tusk all day.
That's awesome.
I like the new Steve Gunn record a lot. I think like Matador has hit a really sweet spot right now with Lucy Dacus and Julian Baker. That Goon Sax record is amazing. So I'm also listening to I'm listening to this classical guy. I can't even think of his name. It's like I'm listening to Bartok. So I do listen to a lot of classical. It's weird. Spotify is so weird because you can just listen to sort of whatever and go down these wormholes. So sometimes my son is always picking out new music. It's interesting because he'll play me something and I'm like, who's the guy from Chicago, Mac? Is it Mac Miller? Is that his name?
Oh yeah.
You know who I'm talking about? So like he'll play, is that his name?
There is a Mac Miller. I didn't know he was from Chicago, but it doesn't matter.
Like a white guy, not the rapper. Isn't there a rapper too? Anyway, but he'll play something and I'm like, oh, this is cool. But then like he discovered a My Bloody Valentine song. He's 13. So he's been playing this My Blood and then this Le Tigre song, but he doesn't know that I know him. So I have to like really resist like being like cool dad of like, oh, I hung out with Kevin Shields one night. I sold him records and drank beer with him. Like I can't say that, right? But
one day.
So, but I get this thrill, like he plays this Le Tigre song over and over and over because to him it's like a new thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'll go down whatever else he's playing. So so sometimes I don't even know what I'm really enjoying, which is fun.
Yeah. That's why I keep Shazam on my phone still, so that when something weird comes on in the back of a lift, or well, in the before times, you're like, what is this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
it's Q&A time.
Yeah, I think now would be a great time for a Q&A. We've got such a small intimate group. I mean, if people don't want to type their questions in the chat, I feel like it won't get too unruly if people just unmute and ask, if you're comfortable with that. Paul?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Hi, everyone. I look forward to reading the book. If I may just very quickly, Hilary, since you're at no depression, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I will say somewhat coincidental to that, and I've liked it when I've read it, but one of the great moments for me in listening to music was at a concert hearing Garth Hudson's wife named Maud, I think, with Garth Hudson earlier on in his career of the band, of course, singing the Carter Family's No Depression in Heaven. I don't know if they ever recorded it, if she ever did, but it was amazing to hear. And
yes, so I mean that's where the name of the publication came from.
Right, the song. I mean the Carter Family song.
This is the current issue, and the art is actually an artistic interpretation of the sound waves from the Carter Family's There's No Depression in Heaven.
This is so weird. I listened to the Bristol sessions just last week. I have not listened to it in like 20 years. I pulled it up.
That's so cool.
Well, I will also note a couple other things, and then my question. Music, I actually met my wife. The only blind date either of us ever went on, if I believe her, and I do, was somebody said to us, this was about 40 years ago, you're the only two people I know who like Captain Beefheart. So we went and saw a Beefheart concert as our blind date. And
that's pretty amazing.
And you mentioned Per Ubu. One of my favorite bits of writing is every time I visited, it's been a while, the website for all of David Thompson's 20 million rules about what people can or cannot do, say, ask, show up at a concert. It's really lovely, I think. My question for you is, you kind of answered it. It's a sort of twofold question. It's about the social worker aspect. I think in your reading, the chapter kind of answers this question. So the question that it kind of answers is, if your sense of ethics and principles, whatever they may be, that apply to social work, also apply to writing, to what you've written, including about your friends, whatever principles may apply to how you communicate and what you choose to say and how you speak. And then the other question, which is related to social work, is, as a social worker, did you use music in interfacing with your clients?
Two good questions. So the first one I'll answer is the latter. Not really with music, although I did form a strong connection with a schizophrenic person, young man from Cincinnati who was like 23, who considered himself a Rastafarian, but he was so sick, like he just considered it, right? In his mind he was, but I remember he wouldn't talk. And then one day, at the time I was a case manager, and I played Yabby U, reggae singer that, it looks like you're familiar. Like, he's my favorite reggae singer. And this young man was extremely religious, and Yabby U's music is extremely religious. And I actually want to say the song I might have played is called Antichrist. I'm not sure, but it hit him so hard. After that, we had a great rapport. But for the most part, no, because we're not in a position to hear music. Now, it's interesting because Columbus is sort of a small town. There are some of my clients in the past have found out who I was through music, or I might be in the paper or something like that. And so that forms something, like, because they know, like, oh, you're like the punk rock social worker guy. In terms of ethics, when I wrote this book, somebody was talking to me about Lisa Carver, who I did a radio interview last week with Ken Katkin, who used to run Homestead, who lives in Cincinnati. And he talked about having her as an editor, and her own writing is she just puts everything out there. And what I wanted to make sure I did was I didn't want to write anything that would harm anybody. So even for the struggles, when I was writing about some pretty raw things that had happened, I wanted to make sure, one, I was respectful, and Lisa wanted me to include some things in the book that were traumatic for me, but might hurt other people if that information was out. I don't have a problem sharing that with other people, but I didn't see the purpose, because I know people would be hurt by it. So, you know, in social work, there's this motto that says, do no harm. And I think that's a really good motto to live life. And of course, we do harm living our life. But if the payoff is going to be more harmful than good, I think that there's a way, like, sometimes when we put ourselves out there, there's the feedback we can get like get a thrill off of it. But if it outweighs, if the harm is going to outweigh the good out of it, then what's my true intention? So that's a very Buddhist thought process, is intention. That's something that really has guided my life. My second life, I guess, intentionality. And you know, and I'm not always, especially, like, I'm not always successful in some of the things I do, but that effort is there. I hope that answers it.
Those were good questions.
If the other people don't have any questions, I guess those two were so fantastic that we could probably wrap it up. If any closing remarks from you, Bela, from Hilary?
Yeah, Bela, I typically, when I'm doing journalism things, I normally ask people, you know, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask about, that we didn't discuss already, that you would like people to know?
No, not really. I mean,
No.
I think I just, you know, we've met in person once, but it seems like we could go on talking, which is
yeah.
So no, it's such an easy conversation. No, I hope people, when if they read the book, they can relate to it, and it touches them. I think that's the important thing. I want it to find, you know, the audience that will respect it. And I want people to remember my friends, and, you know, for how they touch me and can continue to do so. And I really want to thank everybody. Like, this means a lot. You know, it's just, it's very gracious for people to carve out time to do an event like this, or, you know, to read a book, to read a magazine article. It's like, it's exciting, and it's meaningful. It's very touching. So I mean that deeply.
So thank y'all so much for coming out. You can really tell the amount of care that you put into this book, and just
wait till you'll actually read it.
I know, right? Like, please, like, I mean, like, get that second order. They've been sold out, so you get a pre-order for the second printing of Love, Death, and Photosynthesis. I've dropped the link so many times, but just so you know, but there's only really one place to get it right now, because they're sold out from every other publisher. So might as well.
You should always support your local independent bookstores.
Yes, and so Cyan, what I can also do too, and I'm happy, is to send you guys signed book plates or whatever if people want to pre-order it, or you can just have them there if they come in and buy it. And Paul or Laura, or if anybody watches this, if you want to, I'm really easy to find on the internet, and I'm happy to send those out. I've been doing that. People have been like writing like, I couldn't get the book and what do I do? And I'm like, here, you can have this book plate and then buy the book. So
Excellent.
Sounds good. Well, thank you all so much.
Cool.
And then I'll send y'all the recording once I have it ready and everything, so you can share on your socials and get more people to watch. Because this was great. I loved the bit about Ohio, and honestly, a lot of it relates to Kentucky too. When you were talking about the soybean and the cornfields, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's literally like the entire section is just, it's very, very accurate. So thank you for being a delight.
thank you. I
Thanks,
appreciate it.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you.